All right. Good evening, everybody. It's Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight, special show as always. I have Dr. Stephen Hale joining us from Australia. It is winter down there, so he's donning his winter duds, which look very, very similar to our summer duds. I'm just giving him a hard time. We just got finished talking about the Antarctic blasts that come up the coast there, as it were. And without further ado, let me go ahead and bring on the good doctor. Hello, sir. How are you tonight?
I'm very well. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing fantastic. So you have recently written a book, and that book you were kind enough to ask me, which was very flattering, to even write a word, and you're just a phenomenal guy. So I was very excited to do that. Talk to our audience a little bit about this book you've written.
Well, that's very nice of you to ask me, Steve. And it's there are some words of yours on the back cover. I don't actually have a copy of it here. I think it's my copies are coming in a rowing boat. They would have set off from New York some time ago, and they'll be somewhere around Cape Horn, I think, at the moment. Eventually, they'll reach me at some point. It's been, how long has it taken me to write? 6 years? Something like that. I'm a full-time teacher, so I don't get paid to, like yourself, I don't get paid to write and research and stuff. So it's been a hobby, Saturday and Sunday type thing. But it's a great privilege to have been able to publish a book in the Binzaga series, to be associated with people like Michael Murray and Matt Forstater and, of course, Fadel Kaboub as well. So that was great. What I tried to do in the book was give an overview of, a brief overview of what I think is wrong with orthodox macroeconomics and neoclassical economics generally, and then a set of ideas which I think are important as far as a new economics for sustainable prosperity is concerned. And modern monetary theory, of course, is right at the heart of that, but it's not the whole story. So I can tell you briefly what's in it, really, if you like. It's 268 pages of action-packed mystery and suspense, but at the end, when you get to the end of the book, it turned out that the criminal was orthodox macroeconomics. That's what did the crime.
It's interesting you say this because we have the mainstream economics that is taught in the classroom, and then we have the heterodox group, which would be the folks that we surround ourselves with. And then there's another batch of people that just sort of make it up as they go or whatever. And somehow or another, we've got to bring all that together so that we can actually make an impact. Your book takes a good chunk out of that. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the downfalls of the orthodox economics schools, the various schools that are out there, and some of the things that perhaps our listeners and viewers are used to seeing and hearing elsewhere that perhaps fall into the category of incorrect?
Oh, that's a big question. And I think some of the answers to that question your listeners have probably heard many times before from people much more qualified to talk about these ideas than me. I started off at the beginning of the book taking myself back in my mind's eye to October 1981, when an 18-year-old me, just think of a sort of young Hugh Grant figure, turned up at the sophisticated and all that, turned up at the London School of Economics wanting to understand how the world worked and how we could make the world a better, more sustainable, more equitable, and generally happier place. And that's not what I learnt. And it's not what many people before me learnt at uni when they studied economics. And it's not what many people after me have learned. And it's not what the majority of economics students around the world are learning now. I would like to get over to people something perhaps that they're not always necessarily aware of, which is that when they hear great economists like you have on your show, Warren and Bill Mitchell and Stephanie Kelton and Randall Wray and all the rest of them, you can get the impression that a large chunk of the economics profession is progressive and understands modern monetary theory, is rooted in post-Keynesian economics, that heterodox economics makes up a large chunk of our profession. And actually it doesn't. We're a very small part of the economics profession, and it's the economics profession which is the biggest barrier to change, I think. So what I'm trying to do in my book, in a small way, is provide a push for that change. Not because I think that I'm particularly special as far as economics is concerned. I've spent decades as a bog standard economics teacher, and that's really all I want to be. But I ended up starting writing this book, and for that matter, doing public talks and being on YouTube and talking to yourself and some other people too, basically because there are so few of us to do it. We have these great economists, some of which I've just mentioned. I should have mentioned Scott Fulwiler, I should have mentioned Pavlina Tcherneva, and we could go on and on. But that's maybe 1% of the economics profession. So when you talk about the 1%, the problem of the 1%, we've got a problem with the 1% in places like the US. They're the ones that control the wealth. We also have another problem with the 1%. We have 1% of economists that are basically using the right approach to thinking about economic issues. That's the way it is at the moment. So we need as many people as possible to train with economists like Fadel and Pavlina. We need another generation of progressive modern monetary theory economists. But we've really got to push the economics profession as a whole, because we need somewhere for them to train. We need somewhere for them to work. They have to be able to build a career. At the moment, modern monetary theory is a terrible career option, especially outside the US. You're actually in the best position. There are universities in the US where you can work if you're doing modern monetary theory. There are not many places elsewhere in the world, especially in Australia, where it's possible to work as a modern monetary theorist. So in the book, what did I start off doing? I started off saying what I was taught. I went to learn about how the world works. Instead, I learned a lot of mathematics, most of which I forgot later, to be perfectly honest. Some of it is useful, some of it I'm sure it's useful for some people, but I haven't found much of a use for it since. And I learned a particular way of doing economics, which is to take a set of often wildly inaccurate assumptions about what motivates people, how people make decisions, how people make sense of the world, about institutions, and just about how to do economics, and how to build a model which creates some predictions based on those wildly inaccurate assumptions, and then how to try and sort of retrofit that model and those predictions to the world, and make the predictions of the model plausible. Orthodox economics has for decades and decades been based on the idea that your assumptions don't matter. You can use, as I said, a very unrealistic set of assumptions. You can assume that people can virtually see into the future, into the distant future, understand all the opportunities and risks that they're going to face in future decades, rationally decide how much they should spend or save or borrow at the moment. Other assumptions are that if you're unemployed, at least outside of a very short period of time, if there's a significant downturn, if you're unemployed, it's your choice. It's a voluntary decision you've made. The amount of money you earn in work depends on how productive you are, which depends in part on the decisions that you are supposed to rationally have taken yourself about investments in education. All these things, of course, are unrealistic and misleading, and they bias the kind of questions that economists ask, or that's acceptable for them to ask, and also the answers they give. That was what I was taught, and that was what I taught. I wrote 3 textbooks at the end of the 1980s, which I am ashamed of. The nearest one to me that I don't own, please don't go and find it if you happen to be there, is in Hong Kong Baptist University. I've tried to buy all the second-hand copies, basically, to take them out of circulation. You turn up, young people turn up like I did at uni, wanting to know about the world, and they are taught neoclassical economics and more broadly orthodox economics for 3 or 4 years. And progressively over time, they forget what it was they were interested in the first place. And you start off thinking these assumptions, they're unrealistic, but they're going to be relaxed later. They never are relaxed. Instead, you just forget you're making them, and you get used to the idea that this is the way you do economics. And you end up with an approach to economics which is biased towards a laissez-faire view of the world. Or you go further than that, it's biased towards neoliberalism. The idea that not just the government doesn't have a significant role in the economy to protect the weak, to manage the relationship between labour and capital, to ensure ecological sustainability and all these kind of issues, but it actually has a role to siphon wealth from the bottom up to the top. That's what you end up seeing as basically the way of doing economics. You end up with very nice people doing very damaging economics that's contributed towards the tremendous growth in inequality that we've seen in the US and elsewhere around the world over the last 40 years, towards the fact that we've gone so far beyond our planetary boundary and nobody really seems to care very much, or the people in power don't care very much, that we've just taken it for granted that unemployment, underemployment, insecure employment for some and very low wages and terrible working conditions for others are just something we have to accept, and that the role of people and the role of the planet is to feed this monster of which is just the economic growth for no particular purpose. I mean, I'm not against economic growth necessarily, but growth in real GDP over time, it has to be consistent with us living within our natural environment, not risking the standard of living, the opportunities of future generations for today. And also there has to be some purpose to it. GDP, gross domestic product, is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And sustainable prosperity is about providing people with the opportunity to live in dignity and in security, in an equitable society, without using the environment which is available to us today in such a way that we're going to imperil future generations. And that's what we didn't learn. And that's what this book is about. This book is about that alternative.
So what I want to know is, as you went through your journey to get from bad or stinking thinking to understanding the way macroeconomics really works, the operational realities as they are, and started seeing economics through this new lens, new being relative, newer than the classical economists.
But it has very old roots, but
absolutely.
Yes, the way we talk about it now is new. There are genuinely new things about modern monetary theory.
The synthesis, the overall compilation, the bringing it all together into one coherent strategy or lens by which to analyze and understand economics, that appears to be new because it's an overall view of them, and it's way beyond the borders of the United States or Australia. It analyzes currency pretty much wherever it is. But my question for you really is, what was the light bulb moment for you as someone who was classically trained or trained in really bad thinking? How did you cross that divide? What was it that brought you into, the fold, so to speak?
Do you know you could ask that question to almost everybody that you have on here?
Yes.
Because almost all of us went through the same training. There are some exceptions. You have some people on who were lucky enough to study with Randall Wray or Hyman Minsky, but most of us were not. So there are so many levels on which I could answer that question, or from so many different perspectives. In terms of realism, the first thing that happened to me is when I finished my master's degree at the LSE, in 1985, I enrolled as a PhD student. Thank God I didn't stay enrolled, because goodness knows what I would have ended up producing. But there was a tremendous explosion in banking and financial services in London in the mid-1980s. And there were, at the point we had 600 international banks in London. And there were loads of jobs you could go and talk to just a 22-year-old like me. What did I know? Nothing. But you could get a job training people in the City of London. So that's what I did, because I was sick of being poor by then. I bizarrely ended up teaching economics to people who were sometimes directors of these banks, because they got promoted up through the ranks, and the Chartered Institute of Bankers in the UK had told them, well, you've got to go and get some professional qualifications now. So I used to talk to them about money and banking. And this is one of the things I said at the beginning of my book. A couple of times I had a senior banker come to me and say, that's not how it works. And they basically said the sort of things that Warren Mosler says. That's not how it works. This is how it works. It couldn't work like that, actually. It would be chaotic if it worked like that. At the time, I kind of dismissed that, because you think, oh, I'm an expert. I'm the 25-year-old expert. What's this 50-year-old know about anything? But gradually, that has an effect on you. Then we had, as people of our age might remember, there was a big stock market crash in October 1987, which led me to question a few things as well. And I started to take behavioral economics and behavioral finance and insights from psychology seriously. Then I happened to end up at Adelaide University, which is a university that at that time, 20 years ago, had a post-Keynesian head of school, a guy called Colin Rogers. I started reading his work, and that was pretty much the first time since school I'd realised that there was more than one way of looking at how the economy works. I got to meet somebody called Geoffrey Harcourt, who is iconic. He's the equivalent of Paul Davidson. We both met Paul Davidson. Well, Geoffrey and him have the same status, really, I think, in terms of the history of economic thought. And I've had many discussions with him over time. He's not of the modern monetary theory generation, so he wouldn't describe himself as a modern monetary theorist, but he was close friends with Hyman Minsky and knew all these guys. So that has an effect on you gradually. Then I met Phil Lawn, who I was on with before, and about 2004. And Phil, even at that time, was talking about the limits of economic growth and the genuine progress indicator, and the possibility that we may need to move towards some form of steady state economy at some point in the future, rather than producing more and more and more physical goods over time. So I started to listen to him, and Phil was very interested in the work of Bill Mitchell and the job guarantee, because actually, if you are a green economist, the job guarantee plays an important role in a transition towards ecological sustainability. If we do have to move ourselves away from the idea that we have to grow the economy as quickly as possible, otherwise unemployment will increase, well, then we have to find a way of dealing with the issue of underemployment or insecure employment and green jobs. So I started to read Bill's blog. I have to say I was a skeptic. Despite all that, you are so sucked in to that particular way of looking at the world. I still had the idea, I'd been teaching it for 20 years, the idea that there was basically one way of doing economics. Sure, the assumptions were unrealistic, and sure, I would have been a Paul Krugman type of economist, not a Milton Friedman type of economist, but they all work within the same model, the same framework, basically. Then, of course, we had 2008. Exactly the same thing that caused you to rethink your view of the world.
Yes.
In the end, was what caused me to rethink my view of the world, and this is what's followed after that.
So, I look at this and I say, we have an obvious issue with the environment. We have an obvious issue with burning fossil fuels. We have an obvious issue with income inequality, et cetera. I have never heard even something close to a solution from the orthodox school of economics, any of them, quite frankly. Everything sounds like a Band-Aid. I jokingly say putting Band-Aids on heart attacks, but I don't even see it as Band-Aids putting on heart attacks. I mean, we got real things going on right now. And the inability of the economics profession to step up and be a solution, be heroes to the people. I mean, they're more than happy to sit there in their white towers They're more than happy to sit there glad handing each other at very, very, elite events where they don't really intermingle amongst the proletariat. And it's a shame because they are literally the straw that stirs the drink. If they ever decided that they wanted to be useful, my goodness, the good that economists and the School of Economics could do for the people, because this is it, man. We get one planet. I mean, maybe there's someone else. I don't know where it is. I'm not, I'm not up on that, but I can be honest about this. And I'm scared to death of economics. I'm scared to death of the money cranks. I'm scared to death of the powers that be today, the ones that are in power. Every time I hear them speak, I realize that I'm literally in a 1984 novel, listening to garbage being reprogrammed. How many fingers am I holding up, Winston? Kind of moment, and it's almost painful to hear now. I mean, literally, physically painful to hear the lies anymore, because I know what's at stake. We had talked about Grenfell Towers the last time you were here, which is a great example of bad economics. And
and the solution is not that complicated, really. We have to address climate change. We need to stop burning coal, particularly. It's not the only thing we need to do, but we have to address the loss of biodiversity in the natural environment. That's just as important. And we have to stop poisoning the sea. Those are the most pressing problems. Actually, the most pressing problems that human beings have. Inequality is a problem. Unemployment is a problem. We can deal with inequality and unemployment while doing those other things, but it turns out those other things are the most important things of all. The problem with neoclassical economics is it has a bias. It biases you towards thinking that, in general, competitive markets are the best solution for everything, and that issues like pollution, the emission of greenhouse gases, are on the fringe. They're an externality. Just that very word, externality, makes you think, well, they're not central to the economic problem. Sure, we might need an emissions trading scheme, or we might need a tax on some forms of pollution to internalize that externality, but it's still at the fringes. It's not at the center of economic discourse. And of course, if you are so enamored of general equilibrium reasoning that you come to see a laissez-faire, minimal government intervention economy without just ignoring institutions, you think the economy itself is a natural system where human institutions are kind of irrelevant, then you are biased against all the evidence on climate change. You just don't want to admit it because you want the ideal approach to resource allocation to be that competitive market economy where externalities just don't exist. That's the bias that I think an orthodox approach to thinking about economics gives you. It gives you all sorts of other biases as well. I think sometimes modern monetary theory can, some of the discussion of MMT sometimes, what's the right word? Doesn't ignore, but downplays those ecological issues. And they're just as important as getting our understanding of the monetary system right. The great thing, of course, is that we can afford to deal with these ecological issues. Certainly, there's no financial constraint stopping us dealing with these ecological issues. When it comes to investments in solar power, in renewables generally, for example, when governments say we can't afford to do that, that's of course nonsense, and we can explain to everybody that it's nonsense. Oh, you've muted yourself, Steve.
Having heard you and Professor Lawn speak several times now, and having a bit of a friendship with you, sir, I thank you for that. I have gotten to learn so much about sustainability. I'm still a noob. I'm still a novice in many respects. But one of the things that I, as a voter, as a political person often think is that what are the obstacles towards these great economic decisions that you can make and you can prove and you can document, et cetera? And it keeps coming back to a couple of things. Number one, the people have this urge because of brainwashing, years of bad economics, whatever it is, the biases that are in play in society, but they want to tax their way to these solutions. It's an inherent knee-jerk, momentary, got to tax to do this. And for me, I keep thinking to myself, if we have a global environmental crisis and you are stuck thinking about socking it to the man in order to fix that crisis that's going to wipe your children out, right? If that's really how you're thinking about it, and you want to see, plague, and you want to see all kinds of, bad situations occurring, it just seems unfathomable to me that they couldn't grasp the idea that the government can not only fix this financially, but they could also do so without worrying about a tax war. Well, now, while we want to fix income inequality and we naturally trend towards taxing, et cetera, to fix those things, if the order of operations of survival of the species and survival of many species revolves around fixing the climate, why wouldn't we just use the tool, the unit of account of each government to be able to offset whatever cost is out there to get us to renewable energy so that we as a species survive? I mean, it seems counterintuitive, but I don't know what else to do, because you're going to be into a huge fight. You set yourself up in a 1, 2, 3, or 4 phase war trying to get basic legislation passed that would keep us around a little while. Why do we throw up so many barriers in front of it? Why? What is the great divide in being able to make these kinds of bold changes, aside from the fact that they don't want to do it or whatever?
That's why modern monetary theory is central to everything. People have to understand the monetary system, and we've got to get it over to them. And there's only a small group of us within the economics profession doing this. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just listening to everything you were saying, and you were kind of almost answering your own question much better than I could. People don't understand the monetary system. People are brainwashed. There are, of course, some very powerful and rich interests who don't want to see these changes happen. But yeah, sure. How did the US develop the atom bomb? Did they worry about going and collecting the taxes before they? No, of course they didn't. They just went ahead and did it. Yes. And as far as dealing with climate change is concerned, we need governments to take the lead. As far as making that happen is concerned, people have to go over the heads of the economics profession. Don't wait for the economics profession. Yes. Not the majority of the economics profession. Economics will have to be forced to change by people.
Well, that leads me to the next point, right? Which is the work that we do, the work that activists do. It cannot be understated how important it is for each one to teach one, each one to be talking about this. Because if you scan the trending topics of the mainstream media right now, I assure you, modern monetary theory isn't in the top million hits. And it's a damn shame, but it's not. And nor are the solutions that a modern monetary theory lens would produce to empower these politicians, et cetera, to make bold changes. So when you look at the storylines that are trending in media today, it is all neoliberal horse hockey. Every bit of it is garbage. And thank goodness there's a network of us that lets each other know sometimes that, hey, there's an article out here. You might want to get it out to your people, whatever. And, it's a shame that we don't have more knowledge sharing amongst the initiated, as it were, but amongst the MMT community, because having a network that can really blast this stuff out like that is so vital, because we're not going to see change. It's not going to happen from the people. It is happening.
It's happening much faster than we imagined. I can remember sitting at a conference in Newcastle at Bill Mitchell's University in 2013, listening to some great presentations by Bill and his colleagues and people from elsewhere, and thinking, this is all marvelous, but if nobody's going to listen, what's the point? I had that thought. You might have had it, I don't know, at the MMT conference even, well, at another conference in 2013 at Coffee in Newcastle. I sat there and I was actually listening to Bill talking. And it was brilliant what he was talking about. It was his, I think it was that presentation he does about framing. And I can remember having the thought, this is wonderful. I think this man is a genius. I genuinely think that Professor Mitchell is the world's best economist. He's almost unheard of in Australia. Most people in Australia don't know who he is. And that's what I was thinking. I was thinking, well, what is the point? All this great work he does, it's never going to lead to anything. But since then, it has started to lead to things. We've seen tremendous growth. You get, 1 week, Pavlina might be giving a talk at the Bank of England or somewhere, and Stephanie Kelton's at the House of Lords, and Bernie Sanders is talking about a job guarantee. And I am relatively speaking, and I'm not doing myself down, I'm relatively speaking a non-entity. You and I, we didn't develop modern monetary theory. We're just doing our best to spread these ideas as a vehicle for progressive change. But I'm being overwhelmed now with people asking me questions, and I'm going on the radio. I mean, admittedly, it's a local radio somewhere in a remote part of Australia, but we're talking to a lot more people. There are a lot more people listening. There is more interest in modern monetary theory than there are MMT economists to respond to that interest. Mm-hmm. And it's exploding. And I think it will continue to do so. It's dangerous to say that it's inevitable that changes will happen. But I think there's a very good chance. And you don't necessarily need to talk about modern monetary theory. You need to persuade politicians to talk about things like, ensuring that we have a safe ecological space for your 9 children and their children and their children after them, and guaranteeing people employment at a living wage with decent working conditions, with good access to higher education and healthcare and all the things that are important. It turns out we can do all these things. We can afford to do all these things. I've lost my earpiece. I don't care if Bernie Sanders never uses the phrase modern monetary theory once. He doesn't have to. People just have to stop talking about having to raise taxes before we do things. I know we mustn't be unrealistic about it, though. We mustn't give people the impression that we don't need to have taxes. We don't need to balance the budget. We do need taxes. Indeed, if we let climate change become more severe, and if we don't invest in our future by developing renewables, and if we don't deal with these other ecological challenges, then it might be that at some point in the future people end up paying far more taxes because they may be able to consume far less.
So when you say this, I hear you, and I have moments where I'm extremely positive. I feel the vibes, I feel the energy, I see it exploding all around. You see the job guarantee making it into the public sphere. You see student debt elimination coming out, from Levy, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But then you look around and like, I'll just use a very, very small microcosm of what we'll call the progressive media. Okay. I will give, and it's painful to do this, but I will give the Young Turks credit. The Young Turks have been bringing out Stephanie Kelton. They have been bringing out modern monetary theory. I will tell you, Jimmy Dore it's taken years, but Jimmy Dore is now apparently scheduling out Stephanie Kelton to join him as well. But you've got others, it's quite maddening, that are in the progressive community that absolutely refuse to even and they have huge audiences. That's the worst part. So they're laying the tracks for really, really even worse than classical economics. It's hoodoo guru crank economics that they're filling people's minds with. And so while we're starting to see some momentum, it's like, you get 5 yards ahead, you get 5 yards behind with the way the divide is, because we don't have nearly the audience that some of these other groups have. And I watch and I listen, and no joke, they'll be on there for an hour, and in that hour time frame, you will have heard at least 50 falsehoods, 50 really bad ideas, 50 things that would never pass the smell test. But they don't require to be truthful. They don't require to be talking in any kind of economic, decent threshold of truth. They just say things, and people are like, "Oh, you're so smart. I love it. Oh my God, you're just such a guru. Thank you so much. I love you." Just today, for example, Elizabeth Beck, who was one of the tandem that the Becks did the lawsuit against the DNC for rigging the election against Bernie Sanders. And Elizabeth Beck was on her own wall today. And this is she's got some celebrity and she's got a large following. And there she is talking about petrodollars and, the Saudi regime and how the U.S. dollar is backed by oil. And it's like, it was just very, very painful, to see, because so many people heard that, and I could read through the comments, and they were like, "Oh, you're so smart. You're so wise. You're so sage." And you think, wow, that multiplied by Alex Jones and a million others, we've got such a huge mountain to climb to begin with within academics, much less within the voting, the voting population.
The great thing is that we're right.
Yes, we are.
And they're wrong. And there are plenty of intelligent people out there, some of whom might initially listen to these guys and be taken in by them, because they're sometimes very effective speakers and communicators. But if we're patient and we just calmly keep putting our case forward, then more and more people, well, as has happened anyway, are turning in our direction. To an extent, I just think we should ignore those people. There's how many millions of people are there in the US? I mean, quite a few people might listen to those guys. You need to be talking to the other 250 million.
Very
because those guys will always lose. They're never going to win. They can't be that influential. They never have the president. They never have the Congress. We need, if it's not President Sanders, somebody like President Sanders. We need lots of people who are going to support those kind of ideas. Yes, free higher education. Yes, forgiving student debt. Yes, dealing with income inequality. Yes, a job guarantee, of course, dealing with ecological change. You need people like Stephanie Kelton in Washington, D.C., providing advice to these guys. If they don't ever want to mention modern monetary theory, it will really be unfair if they never say what great economists Warren Mosler and Bill Mitchell and Randall Wray are. But if they never do, fine, as long as you do the right thing. Just go ahead and do the right thing and create an equitable, sustainable society, the kind of place where you won't get any more Donald Trumps.
Yes, that would be fantastic. I got to tell you, I know, it's got to be difficult, surfing against the tide and trying to, scream into a pillow and know the truth. And, it's like silent scream. You see the train wreck coming, what the fix is, and you just hope that you can get that word out there in time. And I'll be honest with you, I was really, really enthused, particularly to see some of the bonding that's going on between the New School and Derek Hamilton, Sandy Darity and others, Mark Paul, some of these folks that are not necessarily MMT, but are very, very in line with what we're doing, which kind of speaks to what you're saying.
Can I give you something else to enthuse you?
Sure.
There is a campaigning organization in Australia with 1 million members. I think it's 1 million members. Certainly 1 million people that follow it, which Stephanie has been providing some help to, and Rohan, and I'm a media spokesman for some of what they talk about. It's called Get Up, And recently it launched a big campaign, and it's so influential that the government in Australia is scared by it, Get Up. They have talked about changing the law to try and reclassify it as an organisation to make it more difficult financially for it to continue operating. The Business Council of Australia, which is the sort of rich pressure group, are trying to raise funds at the moment, a multiple of the amount of funding Get Up has, in order to fight Get Up's campaigns. And the first plank in Get Up's new campaign, it's called Future to Fight For, is a job guarantee. And then there's lots of other things that we would approve of, dealing with homelessness and all sorts of other issues. And then at the bottom, it's how to pay for it. It basically explains modern monetary theory.
Wow, that's amazing. Yes, I've actually, I believe you turned me on to Get Up first. And then I heard through Rohan about how, this was going on. And then I remember when, before we went live, when I had Bill Mitchell and Stephanie on with me offline, they were talking about, Get Up as well. So, it's obviously doing some tremendous stuff down there. Hopefully Real Progressives can take a page out of their book and do that.
You're probably more influential in some ways. But the great thing about Get Up is that the people who follow them are disproportionately younger.
Wow.
It's Rohan's work has been great with them. Edward Miller is their head of campaigns, who, like yourself, is a great presenter online in videos. Stephanie is coming over later in the year to Australia as part of this campaign. I hope we see her on mainstream TV over here, not on podcast, but on the sort of thing that millions of people watch. And I hope people get to hear what she's talking about.
I definitely want to find a way to reach out to them, talk to them, like maybe off camera, and just get a feel for what they're doing, some of the ideas they're having, because I really want to be able to incorporate some of those. We have various things. I mean, you've heard my speech about what Real Progressives is before. It's a bold vision. It is. It's a huge vision. And on the back end of this, it's like, it's all I can do to keep us from jumping out there and just doing things, because just doing things sometimes it bleeds energy away from focused campaigns, being able to do real sustainable, drives to really have, piece by piece, laying it down so that people have a clear, unequivocal notion of where you're trying to get to. And then there's an actual fallout if you don't do this. Unfortunately, most of what you see in the United States is kind of like pop music. It's a 2-minute song. As long as it can get radio play, it's happy for a minute. And then after maybe 12 weeks to stand on the top, whatever, it's gone and you never hear about it. And then 20 years later, you watch some video about where are they now? I want to be sustained. I don't want to, be pop culture. I would rather build slow and really, really make it substantive. And it seems like the stuff that they're doing is creating enough pressure that people are paying attention and people are listening. We need to have.
In a sense, you're in the lead in the US. I think the US is going to have a job guarantee first.
Very good.
And I think we'll copy you. That's what usually happens. Australia usually copies what the US does a while later. And I think as far as a job guarantee is concerned, it's also another great thing about it is that when you have a successful job guarantee in place, people are going to be interested in whose idea it was. They're going to be interested in Stephanie Kelton. They're going to be interested in Pavlina Tcherneva. They're going to be interested in Scott Forweiler. They're going to be interested in Fadel Kaboub. They're going to look behind those guys as well, and they'll be interested in people like Warren Mosler and Bill Mitchell and Randall Wray. And it's a great opportunity progressively over time to change the discourse. It's not going to happen overnight. And I think when these things happen, and maybe I'm naive, but I have confidence that they will happen, I think you will have a small part in the history of the US, Steve, you personally, because I think the Real Progressive site has linked up so many people, and it's been so encouraging for academics like Stephanie Kelton and the others who sometimes would have felt themselves ploughing a lonely furrow in the past. You're doing a great job, and all the volunteers that work with you are doing a great job, just as the guys are in Get Up over here and in other countries too. There are some wonderful activists in the UK, and that I happen to know because they're the UK and because I'm English, and in the rest of the world as well. And this is going to be a global movement, but it is taking time. I remember, was it Randall Ray said that when Warren Mosley first came up with MMT, he thought he'd just, maybe because it's right, that he'd just go and talk to these economists about it and they'd listen. They're scientists after all. They'd want to know if you're explaining they've sort of got the monetary system wrong, and that there's much greater freedom for governments to act and responsibilities that governments ought to take than they are at the moment. And he just came up against that wall of silence, didn't get anywhere. And for a long time, there were just a handful of modern monetary theories, such a small handful that you and I know them all.
Yeah.
And it's turned into what it is now already. And maybe it's unstoppable.
I have my fingers crossed. My enthusiasm is always there. It's always, I don't know how to turn this off, Steve. I really don't. I see, it became even more poignant to me. When I had my wake up call, it was during the Great Crash as well. Okay. But my more nuanced recent wake up call came with having a special needs child. And I talked with, I'm fighting for real. This is real too, but this is a different kind of real, right? I go and I sit down with these professionals and I'm talking to them about my son. I'm like, listen, guys, he can't eat regular food. He can't even eat finger food. He can't drink from a sippy cup. He can't talk. There's so many things he can't do. And in order for him to learn to be able to do those basic things, he requires more than 1 hour a week of some occupational therapy. He needs people with him daily. And, we're in a situation where both Melanie and myself work full time. We come home and we've got another child as well here with us. It's like rush, 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 feed, 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 bathe, bathe, bathe.
You're very badly served. Can I could I share something personal too?
Yes, please do.
I'm sure she wouldn't mind. I had he died when he was in his late 20s, but I had a severely mentally handicapped nephew. My sister was a single parent in the UK, and in those days, I don't know whether this would be still true anymore, but in those days, this help was available in Britain under the National Health Service. And you didn't need to be rich. She wasn't rich. She had no money. But he had some wonderful people working with him, and that was vitally important. And absolutely, everything you've just said, I 100% agree with. And these things are real. Everybody you talk to, every second person you talk to, has real stories like this, and there are real needs which ought to be met, which we can perfectly afford to meet. You personally live in, according to some measures anyway, the richest country in the history of the world, with the most advanced technology, and the approach to healthcare and to helping people who need help that you have in the US is even worse than we have in other countries. It's bizarre. The American government spends more on healthcare per person than the British government does, or the Australian government. Yet you don't have free of charge healthcare services. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous the way that we have allowed politicians, with the assistance of some economists, yes, and encouraged by groups that benefit from this. In the case of the US, particularly thinking about pharmaceutical companies and the people at the top of those companies, to distort public policy, to create suffering and inequality where it doesn't need to be. Yeah, that's what we need to change.
Absolutely. Going back momentarily to my son's situation, it became apparent, the daycare that we take him to presently, nice people, they love him. I mean, it's obvious they have an affection for him. He's a special kid. He goes in there. There's not a mean bone in his body. It's all honest. It's all love. It's all pure. But when he's gone off into a corner and he's spinning and he's looking out the corner of his eye with little spoons and stuff like this for his sensory stuff, they just let him go into the corner because they've got 10 other kids over here that are going crazy and bouncing off the walls. They speak, they eat, they drink, they do all the normal things. But my son is just such an easy, he can get locked in his head off in the corner and they'll let him there. And a real facility where kids are trained, they have sensory training, they have all sorts of professionals that, you talk about a great opportunity to enhance real good quality work. There's a real need for trained professionals in this field. But more importantly, the reason why there's not more is there's no money. There's no money for it. You could have centers in every local community for those kids that are autistic or Asperger's or any number of these things that are on the spectrum. They don't do it. Why? Because we haven't been able to make people see through the lens of modern monetary theory. And it's extremely painful. So for me, the push to do this took on an entirely new level, right? It became, because I would talk to them and they would say, we get some funds from the federal government, we get some funds from the local and state, but it's nowhere near enough. And, our counselor, the guy that comes out, the therapist that comes to work with them, he's like flying in. As soon as that hour hits, he's got to run because he's got another kid immediately thereafter that he's got to get to. It's just unbelievable how thin the experts are. And it really does come down to how do we get those real resources deployed to serve the public purpose. And you look over, even in the local communities, for regular schools, right? Regular just health care. And if we fully staffed these things and we fully funded them so that everybody could get the full use of them, I have this strong, strong feeling that the need for the federal job guarantee, while it would always be there, would be far less. There would be far fewer needing to use that, maybe some opting to use it. But the point is that there's so much work that's not being done and so much real needed work that they can't automate. They can't bring the robots to do.
Oh, absolutely.
It's unfathomable to me. It's unfathomable to me.
It is. Well, that's partly MMT. It's also partly having politicians in place who think this is important, and having people understanding that the government is there to act in the public purpose. The government's not the enemy. The government's not something that sucks away your money and wastes it. When you were talking about part of that, I was thinking, well, they don't use an MMT frame, but actually in many places, rich countries around the world, the kind of services that you were talking about exist. Scandinavia, for example. The US has made a choice. American politicians, in your corrupt political system, because it is corrupt because of the way it's financed, the way they're financed, have chosen not to make those services available to people. And you need a different batch of politicians. You need a different batch of economic advisors. Yes, we need a modern monetary theory frame. All these things we're pushing for. They're really important. Again, from something from over here. My wife works teaching English to new migrants and refugees. And many of these guys, they study English for 6 months, then their funding comes to an end. And then they just go and sit at home, a lot of them. And they're unemployed. And then another 6 months goes by and they get some more funding. They come back into class again, but they've forgotten some of the English that they learned. when they're in class last time. What these guys need, many of them, is jobs. That's what they need. And so absolutely, we need a job guarantee for these guys. These guys are not going to be working with autistic kids. These guys are going to be working, improving the local environment, the natural environment, in some cases, maybe helping the elderly to be independent longer. But there are other people, or people whose language skills are better developed, who could be working in a job guarantee, in a role which might at the moment be done, if it's done at all, by a volunteer, helping out. I used to help out in the Brain Injury Network of South Australia, and I used to do speech therapy and physiotherapy with people. You don't always necessarily need somebody who's been through years of training to carry out particular activities. What they need is to be supervised by somebody who's gone through years of training and be told what to do and what to write down and what to take a note of. And there are plenty of people out there who would like secure, fairly paid work in a job guarantee. And there's a huge list of things, needs that are not being met at the moment, jobs that are not being done at the moment. The idea that the robots are coming and taking away all the jobs is laughable. Who works in manufacturing at the moment anyway? Most of those robots are taking those jobs. Well, they've already taken them. They've gone already for the most part. And, of course, people are doing different jobs.
That's right.
And even if a robot could look after me if I'm still here when I'm 90 years old, I don't want a robot looking after me when I'm 90 years old. I want a human being to interact with. And all those kind of jobs will always be there.
So I want to ask you something, because I don't know what the crime rate is. I haven't done a deep dive on Australian crime and punishment, but in the U.S., it's absurdly weighted against, the poor. I mean, there's a lot of racial.
Well, you just lock up your poor, really.
What's that?
You just lock up your poor. Really.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That's the plan. We lock them up. But then you look at a federal job guarantee and you say to yourself, here's a way for people to get reinstated back into the quote unquote American dream. Here's a way to make them economically viable. Here's a way to provide dignity and an opportunity for them to pay back the community, if you will, by serving it for a fee, just like anyone else. I'm wondering if people have realized how important it is to be able to reintegrate these people back into society to keep recidivism down. We see people that continuously recycle back through the system, as it were. And these people have no shot at a real life. Man, their life has been destroyed over the way that we police. Modern monetary theory, to me, one of the beautiful things about it, I think to myself, local policing is largely dependent on fines and fees and other very, very bad practices that target the poor, quite frankly, because they tend to be the ones that can't afford to get their car inspected. They're the ones that can't afford to do various things. Maybe they have dead tags because they couldn't afford to re-up the tags. There's all these little things that, people that are running here and running there because they're working a bunch of menial, Uber style, pay as you go kind of jobs. And we're in a situation right now where so many of the Americans in our country are literally in jail, behind bars. They come out
more than any other country.
Yes.
America locks up more people than China does.
American exceptionalism at its finest right there. And, when I look at this and I think to myself, what do you do with all those people? Let's just say that we got rid of the drug war and we suddenly made marijuana fully legal across all states. And then we went ahead and released the people that were in jail for nonviolent pot offenses. All those people coming out, they got to have something. Maybe they have degrees. Maybe they are already got a great resume. But my guess is that people have spent a few years behind bars, probably need a leg up. They probably need a hand up to get reintegrated in society. What a great way to do that with a federal job guarantee.
People need employment. Absolutely. It's many social problems would shrink to manageable proportions if there was a fairly paid, well-run job guarantee in place. That's what I think. Absolutely, as far as recidivism is concerned, the suicide rate would fall. We know that when you ask people, how satisfied are you with your life? You give them a scale from 0 up to 10. We know people are in employment. If they feel they're being fairly treated anyway, give a significantly higher answer to that question than people who don't. So people would be happier with their lives. They'd be more secure. They could. It's just such a great idea. It's a winning proposal. And I think if the Democrats do it right, whoever emerges as their presidential candidate, if they choose to go with a job guarantee and they do it right, it will win them the presidential election. It is a fantastic idea. And we know how to pay for it. And it doesn't mean taxing people more to pay for it either. And there's all the other things that we know about as well, the fact that it helps to stabilize the economy over time, that it provides an anchor for inflation. You desperately need a decent minimum wage. I was shocked to meet people in Kansas City who were intelligent guys. The person that drove a taxi we were in. We had a conversation and I explained what the minimum wage is in Australia once you took the exchange rate into account. And this woman had never earned our minimum wage. You're richer than us. Our minimum wage in Australian dollar terms is $18.75 an hour. Or I don't know, it's not too far away once you take the exchange rate into account from $15 an hour. In the US, she'd never made $15 an hour. That's what she told me. And it's just extraordinary, the level of inequality which has been allowed to develop in the US and that Democrat presidents have done nothing about.
No.
Not just the Republicans, the Democrats have done nothing about it.
No.
So, yeah, you need a minimum wage of at least $15 an hour. And actually, if you wanted to restore the low paid to their relative position from the late 1960s, you need to be significantly higher than that. And you need people to know that if they lose their job, there'll be a variety of opportunities available to them within a job guarantee scheme. They won't be unemployed. And if in the future we transition to a society where we work fewer hours and perhaps we have a shorter working life, well, people over time may make that choice if it's available to them. As long as they have the security that they know next year and the year after, I'm going to have a job, I'll be able to work. Somebody could take time off now. Somebody could work fewer hours now because they know that they can work later. At the moment, everybody's so terrified about losing their job. My job's not secure. I could lose my job next year. So, but everybody out there, how many people have secure jobs where they know they're going to be in employment in 5 or 10 years' time? Consequently, they're forced at the moment to, as Bernie said, maybe work 2 or 3 jobs to keep as much money coming in as they can, because maybe in 2 or 3 months' time there won't be any money coming in. We need to change the way that we organise our societies. We need to move away from that idea that people are just fodder to serve the economy and move towards the idea that the economy and our institutions, including the government and all the technology that's available to us now, is there to serve us and to protect the environment within which we live.
Absolutely. One final thing. I know we're at the hour, and I just want to ask you this because I've seen a lot of really great policies, ideas, concepts come from the MMT economists. One of the things that I have not seen anything written by, and it's probably out there, and I just haven't found it yet. What, if any, proposals exist to show and demonstrate how to maintain infrastructure within a country? I mean, if we just kept our infrastructure from bridges, roads, the energy grid, you name it. If we just kept that at its peak level, the amount of jobs we would have maintaining it alone would be just unbelievable. But if you
you would have moved to Japan, that's what you would have done. Well, countries do. There are plenty of countries with decent infrastructure.
Do we have an MMT proposal out there that will help? Because I see Donald Trump come out with this garbage, kind of like a private sector handout kind of thing. Yeah, it fixes infrastructure, but once again, back to neoliberal privatization. What is there anything out there? Because this seems like most bridges in America for such a wealthy place are C and D rated. They're terrible. You're taking your life into your own hands. Most of our dams and bridges and levees and so forth, all these different key core components that keep us safe and whatever, they're falling apart, and they probably were built in the 40s or 50s, maybe even earlier than that. And they haven't been maintained to speak of, other than maybe painting them black or patching them up in forever. It seems like this is a very important, and it gives good blue collar work for people that really like working with their hands. Here is a phenomenal way to earn a living and at the same time make the country great, truly great. My God, look at Germany. Germany's got some of the best infrastructure ever. Japan, of course, is just beautiful. China is kicking our butt with infrastructure investment.
Yeah, you think you can't afford it. Not you personally, but the American government thinks it can't afford it. A lot of the MMT guys talk about this. The first thing to do in the US is to work out how much you need to invest in your infrastructure and go ahead and do the investments. Then, of course, you've got all the other things you want to do, including the job guarantee. And then you need to look at, within a credible, realistic model, the possible consequences for inflation. And if it looks as though there are inflationary consequences, then you might need to adjust the tax system.
Very
Not
good.
to pay for anything you're doing, but just to manage the inflationary consequences. But I think they all say, Warren Mosler talks along those lines, and Randall Wray and Stephanie Kelton and all of them. Yeah, absolutely. It's shocking, actually, when you visit the US. If you're not, I've only been to the US a few times, so I was just getting a little way outside New York and looking around. You think, this is so shabby. This is the world's richest country. It looks like the third world in places. Yeah, of course there are so many investments to make. And then you look at the Japanese rail system, where the provider issues an apology when a train turns up a few seconds early. Absolutely. Yeah, there are a lot of things to do. You're not going to run out of jobs. You can afford to do them. You need a decent president like, God preserve him, Bernie Sanders. He needs a decent backroom team, and Stephanie Kelton should be at the head of that backroom team. And then you need to go about fixing and healing America. Amen.
Well, on that note, I'm going to let you go ahead and get on with your life and your night. I'm so thankful to have you on, sir. And I encourage anyone to go look for Dr. Hale's book. Dr. Hale, what was the name of it again for everyone?
It's called Economics for Sustainable Prosperity. It's a little bit expensive because it's a hardback, and it's sort of catch-22. They might do a paperback, but only if a lot of people buy the hardback. So if there are people out there who have some spare disposable income, then I hope it's a good read. But otherwise, I'll keep writing loads of stuff for free and putting up.
You will be in England, if I'm not mistaken, not too far from now as well.
I'm going to meet Bernie's brother as well. I'm so excited because the Oxfordshire Greens have asked me to do a talk on the economics of Bernie Sanders, which will actually be a sort of tribute to Stephanie Kelton, I think. But it's going to be chaired by Larry Sanders, Bernie's brother. That'd be great. So I can't wait to meet Larry Sanders and our friends in the UK. You and I have a lot of friends in common who I could name, but I won't. Patricia, of course, you interviewed once.
Yes.
I hope a lot of those people are going to be there, and Prue, and it's going to be just great to meet them all. I can't wait.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Dr. Hale, thank you again for joining us. I can't wait to have you back again. I mean, you're wearing the color. Show them the shirt, man, because that shirt is just glorious.
Oh,
That is old school right there. That is the OG logo from way back when we first.
I've got a modern one too. I've got two of them.
I love that one though. I made that one.
Oh, it's a great one.
It's
a great one. It reminds me of that event at the 1968 Olympics when those athletes held their gloved fist up, which is one of my all-time great events, great moments.
Absolutely. All right, sir. Well, look, have a great night. Thank you for the shirt. And please get Dr. Hale's book, and we look forward to talking to you again real soon. So have a good night, everyone. From me to you, hasta la vista.
Thanks very much, Steve.